Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Richard Torres has advanced to 11-0 following a DQ win over Joey Dawejko, and this fight was on the Munguia and Bazinian undercard. In fact, it was the co-main event. And this was one of the better performances of Richard Torres' career to date. We saw a little something more from him in this one. Obviously, it went a few more rounds than some of his earlier fights, but he actually worked through the gears. But what we'll do is we'll jump straight to the fifth round in this fight. And this is where things were called off because Joey Dawejko couldn't keep his mouth guard in his mouth, knocked out by Torres, and the fight was called off. And this followed 4 instances in round 4 of the same. Some of them, at least the first couple, 1 or 2, looked to be deliberate, and then the referee started taking points. So 2 points taken in round 4. And this coincided with a period of the fight where Torres, it was all Torres all the time. He'd got on top by this point. And how had he done that? Well, it started off slow. He was having a look at Joey Dawejko early on and using the jab, measuring the range. And this is something that he did well in this fight, as the slightly taller fighter had a couple of inches on Joey Dawejko. Maybe it was about 4. He was able to, over the course of the first couple of rounds, really get his range down, and that became a feature in the fight because oftentimes, especially from, I would say, the second half of round 2 onwards, Joey Dawejko was often just finding air because you had Richard Torres, coming in and out, using his agility and speed, using his footwork, and basically, having it his own way. And it was round 2 towards the end where Richard Torres really started to land, and with some frequency. And he only picked it up from there. And round 4, really, he had it all over Joey Dawejko. Using that agility, he was stepping around Dawejko pretty much at will. He was throwing shots from all angles, including sometimes some lead hooks. So he was starting to feel confident, and it was a good performance because he had that look, he dialed himself in, and then ultimately he went to work. And you could see the body language of Joey Dawejko starting to change. In round 2, Dawejko was starting to, just have a few complaints to the referee, and that's never a good sign for a fighter, especially one in a journeyman capacity where they're being brought in to, give the guy work. And I think for many of us, we hope that Joey Dawejko, who in the past has been a pretty decent sort of durable journeyman, would be able to go some rounds with Torres because he desperately needs the rounds, he needs the seasoning. And he got some of that, maybe not as much as perhaps some of us had hoped. This was an 8-rounder, and Torres, obviously, with what he was doing, if it wasn't for the disqualification win here, he was going to stop Joey Dawejko because the body language was going all downhill. He was starting to look a little bit sorry for himself, and he was really starting to get pieced up in round 3, and especially round 4, where Richard Torres had it all over him. So when the mouthguard started coming out, obviously that was a sign of that Dawejko wanted a bit of a break. His mouth was hanging wide, he was gulping in big ones, and some of it ultimately wasn't even deliberate because Torres was catching him with so many big shots. He was knocking that mouthguard out by the end. So it might read as a disqualification win, but Torres did the work, and he really put it on Joey Dawejko. And I guess we have to temper some of the credit here because I think Joey Dawejko, obviously a smaller fighter, so we want to see Torres effectively do the same against a much taller heavyweight, because Torres, in the context of the heavyweight division, not a huge heavyweight at 6'2". He was able, once he got his range down against the smaller fighter in Dawejko, have it his own way. But it's much harder to break down a guy with a longer reach and obviously with a few inches of height on you. So hopefully they can continue to get guys that can give him good work. But I do think that Joey Dawejko is far removed from his best days as a journeyman. Actually, he retired a few years ago, and that followed when he got trounced in a couple of rounds by Zan Kosobutsky. So he had been retired for a little bit. He's come back. He's had a few low-level fights, and now he's got a fight on ESPN against Richard Torres. Hasn't really worked out for him, and maybe for his health, perhaps he should consider maybe retiring for good. There was a few moments in a few spots where Dawejko basically throwing Hail Mary shots where he did catch Torres, but the moments of success were few and far between. He is far removed from his best days as a gatekeeper in the heavyweight division. But in Torres, he put in a good performance. I think it was impressive in the context of this fight and how he went about it, and I think he showed a few new wrinkles, or maybe just he's improved certain aspects of his game. I think the footwork continues to go from strength to strength, and the management of the range was really impressive in this one. And he is explosive. He does have really good agility, and at a certain level that's going to really help him, because as we know, some of the tall timber in the heavyweight division aren't as agile. He could make them look like they're standing still. Joey Dawejko does have, okay head movement and reflexes, for a guy of a smaller stature and the weight that he comes in at. But guys that are much taller and don't necessarily have some of, the best head movement, Richard Torres is going to have some success. But obviously, as a guy who sometimes you could see it as a little bit of a high-risk strategy with the way that he darts in and out, he is at risk of walking into something. But I think he is improving, and this was a good win and another step. They had talked in the build-up to this fight, especially in fight week, about more pressure being on Anderson, on Richard Torres, I should say, because of the loss for Jared Anderson. And he was asked after the fight, is he a contender now or still a prospect? And he said, look, I'm whoever you want me to be. I think he's still a prospect. He's only 25 years old. There is no need to rush Richard Torres at this point. He needs to have more seasoning fights, more rounds. He needs to bridge the gap between being a prospect to a fringe contender and then ultimately a contender. He's still faced basically towards the end of his prospect phase, in my view. He can get there. He can become a contender and be in some big fights. And I think in the next 3 or 4 years, we will see him in some of the bigger fights, top 10 fights in the heavyweight division. But he needs time and seasoning. And if he continues to develop, he can potentially do something in the heavyweight division and be in some of those big fights. I don't think there's a need to rush him. He's not a contender in my view. And this was a good performance, and hopefully he's out again soon. Possibly by the end of the year. I don't know if that's too much of a stretch, but we'll see. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.